Hello and welcome back to Jo's Art History Podcast, a podcast that celebrates all things art historical with me, your host and resident art historian, Jo McLaughlin. Hello, welcome back. It is episode 70. That's right, everybody, the big 70. And what better way to celebrate such a monumental occasion and landmark, having published 70 full-length episodes, than discussing one of, I would say, Europe's most pioneering female artists. This week on the podcast, I am joined by British artist Sam Bradbury to discuss all things Hannah Höch. Now, Hannah Höch, for those of you that don't know, was a German Dadaist artist, and she's best known for her work in the Weimar period, so the Weimar Republic, who were the ruling government at the end of World War I. And although the Dadaist movement, and indeed Hannah's involvement in the Berlin Dadaist spin-off group, was very short-lived, she very much had an impact, and her works are a real testament to her commitment to commenting and acting out against a state and government and in general, just her general country's predicament after World War I, her dislike and pushback from what was expected of her and her people, as well as much bigger, broader social issues that we'll get into in the podcast. Hannah Höch is an incredible artist. I want to thank Sam once again. He was a great guest to come and have on. I came across Hannah only a couple of years ago, actually, and I think it's quite criminal that for someone that was so prolific and whose works are so moving and very contemporary even now, and Sam and I have a lovely discussion about that. She is someone that largely is overlooked. I think when people think of Dadaism, they think of Duchamp, they think of Jean Art, for example, they think of Max Ernst, they think of a whole load of other very male-dominated names, and Hannah absolutely should be up there, and hopefully after listening to this conversation with Sam, she will definitely be one of the first people you think of when you hear the name or reference to Dada or Dadaism. It's a great episode. We discuss 3 particular works. Interestingly, at the end of her time with the Dadaist group, and what as an artist she was really trying to communicate and push back against and comment on, and just how brave of an artist she was really to sort of stand in the face of very sort of politically charged messages and expectations and really push back on that. She was an incredible artist, and you're going to really love this episode. So sit back and relax as Sam and I discuss the incredible Hannah Höch. Thank you so much for coming on the pod and talking about the incredible Hannah Höch. And we'll caveat this now, shall we? Will we just address the elephant in the room? Idea. Before we hit record, and I was sort of like running through, and we're like, right, any questions? And then you brought up the one that I was going to bring up, which is, how do you pronounce her surname? Because, and Sam, jump in and defend me here, there's about 9 different ways, depending on who you speak to, what videos you watch, where you're from in the world, how people pronounce Hannah's surname.
Yeah, I've heard, Hannah Höch, Hannah Höch, Hannah Höch, Hannah Höch. Yeah, there's loads. And I'm glad we agreed on Hannah Höch.
Hannah Höch, yeah.
Yeah, I'm probably doing it wrong. So apologies to any German listeners who...
Listen, we'll do a combined apology to any German, Austrian speakers, listeners that we're offending. Yeah. We're trying our best, but we're spreading the good word of Hannah Höch. Because she really is incredible. And somebody that, I studied art history. We really did fly through her. Dadaism, when I think of like a Dadaist, you think Duchamp. You don't...
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
and
let's get some of the female.
Well, yeah, I don't remember hearing about her growing up at, learning about art in school and then in art school. I think Dadaism gets kind of overshadowed by surrealism a little bit, which came after it. And because of that, I think that also is one of the reasons she maybe gets like, she's like this hidden gem in the art world that when you discover her, it's so incredible that Yeah, well, I think so anyway. She's one of my
I
absolute
think,
favourite artists of all time.
yeah, I think she's great. And really interestingly, and I wrote, when you answered my open call and I wrote you back, I wanted to do an episode on her years and years ago because someone had suggested that I did, and I started looking into her and I was like, my God, she's so fascinating. And then it never happened. So thank you for being the person that decided that this was the time to record this episode. I've had a really lovely time like researching her, but I think, and I don't know if anyone else will agree with me that's listening, when you sent your images to me earlier today and you were like, they're all vastly different. And I was like, great. And I looked at them and I was like, oh, they're all photo montages. And then once I picked apart the stories and then I started thinking about the dates and what was happening in those dates, that I found it really, really interesting. And I've got so many questions for you as to why it's them. But I think it's good to set the scene for so people that have never heard of Hannah Höch or Dadaism. Could you just give us a little brief whistle-stop overview of Dadaism to sort of lay the groundwork of the brilliant Hannah?
So Dadaism, there's so many isms. But Dadaism, it was a very kind of short-lived small artist movement in Germany in the Weimar Republic, I believe, after the First World War and just before the Second World War. And there was this period where, Germany lost the First World War and people were expecting them to kind of pick up the pieces and, sort things out. And I think there was this big kickback against military and the politics, of the time. And Dadaism was very playful and very non-traditional. And it was like almost like they were building their own new art world, from the rubble of the First World War. I think it's really interesting. But yeah, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really beautiful overview of what Dadaism is, because it's really, really grounded in what was happening at the time, isn't it? Mm-hmm. That's so important when you look at these works in terms of understanding context and even materials, the types of materials that they could get hold of, because, excuse my French, it was an absolute show in Germany after World War I. The 1919, they signed the Treaty of Versailles, where essentially Germany had to accept complete responsibility for World War I. And economically, it just crippled the country. It was really quite a difficult time. And Dadaism was actually founded by a group of artists that fled Germany in just sort of the start of World War I, or in the middle of it. So it was actually founded in Zurich in Switzerland, which I found
I didn't know that.
Really interesting. Yeah. So they fled because Switzerland famously is a neutral country. So it was never part of any of the world wars. And they sought refuge in Zurich as this safe space. So they founded it in this little bar in Zurich, which is still there to this day. And they would gather and they would sort of chat about what Dadaism is. And as you said, created this movement. And then when World War I ended, they all sort of spread out through Europe, and there was certain hubs of it. But Berlin was the German hub. And that's where Hannah Höch was based, and where she came across a couple of other characters whose names we'll also butcher because our German pronunciations are shocking, but that's fine.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the main thing to take away is what they were working with and sort of fighting against. Because when you think about it, they were active at a time just as the Nazi Party, which would eventually become the Nazi Party, was on the rise. Yeah. And that's where I think it's really interesting, the time frame that you've selected the images for your three that you want to chat about. But I think let's set the scene a little bit further, and then maybe let's introduce Hannah. Can you tell us a little bit about Hannah and her involvement in this Dadaist group in Berlin?
So, one other thing I remembered while you were talking about Dada is a nonsense word, so it doesn't have a meaning either. Yes. Which I think really fits well with the movement, because not that it's nonsense, but I like that the whole idea that it is using unusual methods to make art and trying out new ideas. It must have been really exciting at the time and been really sort of fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. And a bit sort of mental as well. just sort of coming off the back of a world war and then seeing what this group of people were throwing together. Yeah, absolutely. And the Dadaist group in Berlin are also sort of very famous for like coming up with the idea of photo montage, which is what?
Yes, yeah.
Hannah
So,
Höch.
and it's interesting because when you think about collage, I think, there's famous collage artists. Picasso did some, George Braque, who else? Kurt Schwitters as well. He was a Dadaist figure as well. But a lot of their collage work was all it was using things like newspaper and sheet music and things, but it was using them for texture and shape and form. Whereas Hannah Höch actually created images from other images, which hadn't really been done before,
No.
to my knowledge. And it was really, I don't think she's given enough credit for being that groundbreaking. And they certainly didn't give her enough credit. She was the only woman in the movement, and they did not treat her as an equal.
No.
And she did not like that very much at all. And she put elements of that into her artwork, which we'll talk about in particular with one of the pictures that I chose.
And what I found really interesting about it is how hypocritical the male Dadaists were, because they were promoting the idea of this modern female, that you had equality to man, and you could be your own woman and you could go out and you don't have to adhere to certain standards and your appearance. And but behind closed doors, they weren't putting their money where their mouths were, because essentially, and there's lots of evidence of this and quotes of this, of essentially the guys sort of using Hannah when they had their meetings as essentially a glorified waitress / chef, which I found really disgusting. And it made me think, do you know when you have that question of like, who would you like to have at a dinner party, dead or alive? I would love to know how furious she was. Like, I would love to hear that rant from her firsthand.
She had a history of having people treat her like that as well. So when she went to design school, to art school and things, like she did design because that's what her dad wanted her to do. And she was pulled out of school to look after her younger sister, and she was expected to do all these different things that she didn't want to do, and I think the fact that continued even in her art career is, it's heartbreaking. It's really, really bad.
I didn't know that she was pulled out of school to look after, I didn't know she was pulled out of school. But she was a trained designer. And I think, did she not do like fashion or pattern making or something like that?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the whole point of like, or then I also read that she did something to do with graphics, because she worked for a magazine for a little while, something like that. She did graphics at a magazine.
And actually, she was a really good painter and did lots of other stuff as well. I've seen a picture of her with some puppets that she made as well. And so she wasn't tied down to collage. She tried her hand at a lot of different art materials as well. So that's something else I love about her, because that's something I try to do in my own practice as well, is try out lots of different stuff. I think it's good to be experimental. And I think a lot of that fed into her collages as well, this like idea of fashion and textile, and just it all came together beautifully.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's a good reminder. I think for anyone, regardless if you're an artist or not, like people love to pigeonhole you, don't they? Like they need to know what's the thing that you do, because they just have to put you in a little box. And I just think that the world is big and life is long if you're lucky, and you get all these different experiences. So why not flex your hand at lots of different things? Like just try it. Like I love I'm going to look up that image of her making puppets, because that to me is so completely fascinating. And I didn't know she painted. I thought she just did these photo montages. So there you are. That in itself as well shows you, like, because when you do like a very sort of light Google, it's these montages that come up as the thing.
Yeah.
And there's one very, very famous work, which if I was a betting woman, I would have bet that you would have, that's the one with the kitchen knife one, cut from the knife. Yeah. Hold on, I've got the whole title somewhere here. So her most, arguably, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong here, is Cut with the Kitchen Knife. So Dada is the last Weimar beer belly cultural epoch of Germany, 1919 to 1920, rolls off the tongue as a title. And it's kind of like this cornerstone work that very much encompasses all the things that we've just been talking about. It's kind of like her poking fun at the political state, the consumerist state, the Dadaists themselves.
Yeah, it's almost like her own little manifesto in a
Oh, I
piece of
love
work. It's
that.
really good.
Yeah, it's
It's
really,
really good.
really incredible. But you've chosen, really interestingly, works from after she technically left the movement, or left the group rather, because
Yes, yeah,
she, and this is what I think is people don't seem to realize, is Dadaism really, as you said beautifully at the start, it really wasn't a very long period in time that these people were active, but it's been so transformative for lots of artists in terms of using the movement as a springboard into pushing into abstraction and experimentation more and
yeah, yeah.
more, which I think is just incredible. So again, it just shows you it doesn't matter how, like, it can be short and sweet and powerful. But she had a falling out. She kind of essentially, like, enough is enough in sort of the 1920s. I think it was like 1922, I've read. She kind of just washed her hands of the Berlin Dada group and said, I'm not interested in sort of being this thing that you look on as an amateur anymore. And
Yeah, and I'm so glad she did, because I think that I really like, because all of my favorite images by her, my favorite pieces of work by her, are after that sort of period where she kind of really, I don't know, kind of showed off in a way, sort of.
Yeah, how
And
great she was. And I actually,
yeah,
what I love about the images that you've chosen is how, I don't know, it just shows you like how much she challenged the concepts and the norms of things. And again, I really kind of want to reiterate, you have to remember she's in a state where Nazism is, no, it's not called that as of yet, but Hitler is
yeah,
leading a political party. I think it's the German Workers' Party in Germany. He's written Mein Kampf. He's gone to jail. He's tried to like run for power. It's not succeeded. Sort of turn of the sort of, I think it's 1933 is when he comes to
yeah.
power eventually. But the first image that you have chosen is called Indian Dancer. So can you tell me a little bit about it and what it is that you love about it so much?
So what I love about it most is that on first glance, you kind of see an image of a face, and it's made up of a lady. I think she was a famous model at the time, or a famous movie star.
Yeah.
And it's collaged with I can't remember exactly where it's from, but it's like an ethnographic sculpture. It's part of a series she did called Ethnographic Museum, I think it was.
It's Cameroonian is what I've read.
Cameroonian. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. I should have made some notes.
That's
But yeah,
all right.
and then in the headdress, there's almost sort of like knives and forks and spoons and cutlery. And I think on first glance you would say like, oh, what an interesting and strange picture. It reminds me of these surrealist collages by Max Ernst, which are just weird. And you're like, oh, but there's more going on, lots more going on. So it's, to start with, it's the Cameroonian mask is quite sort of male looking, and it's got that mixture of female and male elements. And she was very kind of androgynous herself. And that was something that, she depicted in her work, was this androgyny, this new woman that the Dadaists kind of idealized was not traditionally, or not supposed to be traditionally feminine, and not, tied to the kitchen and looking after the kids and, all these stereotypical roles. And this image kind of has that element in it as well, with the knives and forks, which are these very kind of, that's utensils used, for cooking and things like that. And they're used instead as this, headdress, this
it's like crown of
signifies, a crown
of domesticity.
Something that signifies power or elegance. And I just think that's really clever. And I don't think it was, I don't know, it's difficult. I don't think it was maybe appreciated very much at the time. She was years ahead.
And I'm going to be very honest with you. When I first saw it, I didn't like, and I've said to you that, like, and I said it while recording, when you sent me the three images, I was like, oh, they're very similar. And they're absolutely not, because it's the stories behind them that you have to really understand. So that actress that you've mentioned, she was a very famous French actress, and her best known part even now is Joan of Arc. And it
Oh,
was
wow.
called The Passion of Joan of Arc. And if you look at the sort of movie stills from it, she wears a crown of thorns as like being equal to Christ. So I love that she's kind of given her like a crown of cutlery or cut
Yeah.
out cutlery. I find it really, really interesting. And again, like you have to really like at the time, I think people would have known that because the movie was apparently huge. It came out in 1928. This is, I think, 1930
Yeah.
is when this work was shown. And Hannah, and when she showed work, she was like widely acclaimed. Like she did have like a very good following. She like her works were celebrated. Like she was seen as being able to go sort of toe to toe with the Dadaists, even after sort of removing herself from the group and the title. But I
Yeah.
love that the more I was able to sort of like dig into this, that I was like, that's so interesting. And then the masks sort of talking about sort of looting and the wars and sort of stealing things and sort of reclaiming them as your own. And what it made me think of there when you were talking about how it's like a male element, maybe that's sort of a play on like the yin and yang of male female equality.
Yeah.
Actually, that,
And
yeah.
I think another thing that's really important to remember with this picture is that, with the rise of the Nazi Party, they were very much, I think they called our work degenerate work, and
Yes.
they were very dead against anything like that. And this image having this mixture of, a beautiful lady, and then adding, this artwork that, the Third Reich would have considered, degenerate, sub, human, they were just monsters, and they didn't, to put that together, it must have been a real kick in the face to
Yeah.
to those who didn't like her artwork.
Absolutely. And I think the sort of ballsiness really of displaying it in an environment in a country where people were actively pushing against that's that kind of work. Because the whole point of these sort of disjointed, almost they're not supposed to be haunting in like a surrealist sense, some surrealist images that are a bit like, oh God. But the Dadaists, it wasn't supposed to be haunting. It was very much a take on an opinion piece on what was happening in the country at the time. So these sort of fragmented sections that are coming together, it's all symbolizing how fragmented the country was in lots of different ways, be that opinions on what women should and shouldn't do, what art should and shouldn't be. It's really, really powerful. But again, it's a shame that she's not spoken about more. Of course, there's people out there that love her, and she's a very well-established artist. But I think in terms of if you were to say to anybody, can you name a Dadaist? They'd probably be like, maybe Duchamp.
Yeah.
I don't think she's your first go-to.
Yeah, she had everything against her. Like the Dadaists herself were against her, in many ways. And then to have to go into hiding during the Second World War and, not exhibit any work, not show anything off, she kind of almost had to continue in secret because she wasn't allowed to display her work. It was, just seen as this derogatory, meaningless work by people who just wanted traditional artwork, from the Nazi Party. Yeah,
like a nice landscape, because as we all know, Hitler was a landscape painter.
Yeah,
and famously, there's a whole debate around had he got into art school, World War II never would have happened. I think it would have happened at some stage, but there's this very weird conversation online that happens. So that's Indian Dancer, which again, 1930. This is just at the cusp of the rise of Hitler into power. His popularity is growing. She's sort of left the Dadaists and sort of in the dust, really. She then, again, just keeps creating these incredible pieces. What I really want to talk to you about is the second work that you've chosen called Flight.
Yeah.
It was only once really understanding everything that was going on. And I don't know who the people are. I tried to find who they were. I couldn't find anything. But I think
this is one that I don't know very much about the piece of artwork either, but it's one that stuck with me because I think it was the first that I ever saw myself
Oh.
of her artwork. And it was at a time when I was doing collage myself, and I still do a bit now, but it was my main focus in my first year of art school. And I think I mentioned earlier on Max Ernst and how he created these unusual collages out of Victorian etchings and things like that. And they were very much just to go like, this, look how dreamlike and surreal this is. And there was nothing more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I saw this image, for me, I thought it was something made brand new now, a really modern collage. And then I looked into it and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it was 1931, I think.
Yeah.
And that blew me away because I just couldn't believe that something that well made. And I think it really shows off how skilled she is as a collage artist. So the reason I chose that one is because I really enjoy the fact that it got me, exploring more about her work. And it also, I think, shows off how crisp and perfect some of her collage work is. It's really, just really so accomplished.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm going to describe it to people like that are listening to this now. It's a figure, I'm assuming female, and it's sort of half their face is this very sort of angelic female face. I think I know this face from somewhere. She looks very like angelic, very sort of like Man Ray, perfect, like model sort of thing. Like that, she looks so familiar. But half her face is also like a chimpanzee, and she has an exaggerated large hands. She's sort of almost being chased off a cliff by this sort of weird, huge swan. Would you say it's a swan? Swan?
Yeah, I'd say a swan or a seagull or something.
Yeah.
You can't really tell because it's got no bird features.
Yeah,
with the wings. Yeah.
With this male head. And again, I'm so sure this is going to be some sort of member of like a political party at the time or a leader of some kind. And only really understanding what she rebelled against and what she really sort of fought for in terms of her art, because she was really revolutionary. Like I listened to this really beautiful video actually, and I'll leave a link to it in the show notes below for anyone that's interested, that talks about how she rebelled against the ideas of gender standards and gender confinement, which in the 1930s is so revolutionary. Okay, when you think about it, you've come out of a war, you thought you were going to die, you kind of want to like live your life the way that you want to live it. And that's kind of what they were encouraging with this idea of like the modern woman. And what I kind of see this now, knowing all of that, is they're taking this concept and they're sort of driving it off a cliff because it's about to get snuffed out and actually you're going to go back to the kitchen. That's what I see this as, only from knowing everything else that was going on at the time. So I love it. And initially I was like, okay, this is an interesting one. And now I'm like, oh my God, I see it. But I'm pretty certain you're going to take something different from it, or someone else looks at it, they're going to take something different from it as well. Like, I just think it's such a good image. It's such a good work.
Yeah. And I think as well, the idea of, sort of the ideal man and woman being this sort of Aryan, blonde hair, blue eyed, but, the ideal sort of woman was very different to what she had idealized and wanted, and what she saw as the ideal woman. I think as well, it must have been really a real struggle for her. And I love the fact that she didn't stop fighting that.
Mm-hmm.
She was very androgynous. I believe she had relationships with men and women as well.
Oh.
And I think she didn't call it a lesbian relationship. It was a closed door relationship, I think she called it. So she never admitted, but it was there. And I think as well as that, I think maybe somebody else might see this and take from it the idea that, we evolved from apes and monkeys, that we're not this divine
superior race.
We're not this thing separate from nature and animals and things, but we are actually
just made up of different bits. And
Yeah. And I really like that take on this image as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. But I would love to know who the gentleman is. So if anyone listening knows anything about the female faces that are used, or the female face that's used in this, or the gentleman's face that's used in this, like, please get in touch and let us know. Like, contact details are in the show notes in the podcast. But I really love the idea of this being like a swan that is the bird in this, the swan that's just absolutely furious at this creature and is sort of like fleeing away. Because I think we've all had that encounter where you're like, oh my God, this like really aggressive thing is coming at me now. No, I loved it. And I think it was, again, a really interesting one to pick because this is 2 years before Hitler is elected president. It is the year he is running to be president and subsequently doesn't get elected, and then he runs in and then gets it. So this is a really politically charged pushback of a party.
She must have been able to like sense that, like, you know, bubbling under the surface, you know, because I think I don't think it was any secret that people were unhappy and looking for something different.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's move on and talk about the final image that you have shared with me, which is called Fashion Show. Now, arguably, the first thing that strikes me about this compared to the other two is that it's really, really colourful.
Yeah, really colourful. So it's got really lovely sort of nice sort of teal and greeny blues and sort of like a nice orangey yellow as well. And it's just the choice of colours are perfect. You know, they really complement each other, but they don't overpower. And a lot of her other work, you know, I don't think she chose colour on purpose. I think she worked with what she had. You know, if an image was a certain colour, it's not like now when you can do a photo montage and collage things on a computer and change scale and colour and everything else like that, you know.
And I think that's a really important part to reiterate. This is a country recovering from war. Art supplies were not top of people's lists. This was discarded magazines, this was books, this was things people were giving her, things that she was purchasing. This is like, she's working with the materials at hand, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and she incorporated tickets and rubbish and all sorts of things into her work as well. Yeah, it's amazing what she did with it.
Yeah.
But there's a few things about this particular image that I really love. Would start with like the fashion show.
Yeah.
It's kind of harking back to, you know, some of her career as textile designing and things like that. But also what I really love about it is that these faces of these, you know, 3 different models in it, they're still beautiful, even though they've been cut up and changed, and there's elements of masks and I think a doll, and one of them has 4 eyes, one of them has it's part of a mask to it, and it's just that she still managed to make it look very
appealing.
You can tell that they are, you know, models or fashion stars. You know, you can tell that that's what they're meant to be.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, they're made up out of these different bits. I think one of the images is actually a Botticelli. Is it Venus?
It's Venus. It's Botticelli's Venus. So I'm looking at it now on screen while I'm talking to you as I've split my screen.
Oh, that's great.
And this I didn't clock this initially. I had to, like, I was reading an article about it and I was like, F. And I went back and I can't believe, as an art historian, I couldn't spot quite arguably one of the most famous painted females out with the Mona Lisa ever. So yeah, I love this reference. No, she's not in there. The Mona Lisa is not in there.
Okay.
She's not in there. I was saying arguably she's probably one of the most famous females. But yeah, and even sort of knowing that now, I'm sort of looking at the middle figure, which is kind of got like a sculptural head to it. I'm sort of like, is that Cupid? Like, what is that supposed to be? Because it would kind of make sense if it was, because it's the smallest model. But they're all wearing these really quite elegant, I would say, Tudor-esque garb. Yeah, I don't know.
They're unusual, aren't they? I think they're from some sort of doll.
Ah.
Yeah, so something from a magazine or a pamphlet or something from a museum. And I think they were meant to be dolls.
Wow.
And I think as well, they're the same image 3 times. So they aren't 3 separate dresses. They're all the same, exactly the same. So she must have found that image 3 times. And then the only thing that changes in these people in this fashion show are the heads. And that's something else I really love about it is, they're all wearing the same thing, but so vastly different faces and all collaged in very different ways as well. So one's almost sort of spliced down the middle and made up with different eyes and mouth. Another is just an amalgamation of 2 faces. Cut very, very, very well and kind of very unusually to make almost like Picasso-like faces as well. Because, I think he was also influenced, wasn't he, by masks and elements of,
Yeah, and Picasso was one of Hannah's influencers, which when I read, I was like, oh, of course, like that just completely makes sense now, that because if they were all sort of moving around Europe at that sort of same time. What it struck me, and if you think I'm reaching, you can tell me. I wonder if this is a commentary on the fact that because of obviously supplies getting in and out of the country, women had essentially everyone dressed exactly the same. So I wonder if this is a commentary on the fact that you are a copy paste of your neighbour, and actually that's what they want you to be. They want everybody to be exactly the same, to fall in line, to behave the same. I wonder because this is 1935. So this is the, okay, World War II is 4 years away. Yeah. It's very much brewing. Tensions are rising. And this is also something that we didn't mention, which has also been a huge influence in 1929, thinking about the context of when these works were created. So 1929, I think in the works that we've spoken about previously are 1930, 1931 is the Wall Street crash. The Wall Street crash in 1929. Yeah. Because America was giving aid to Germany. And when the Wall Street crash happened, it completely dried up. And the country really, really, really struggled. And it was because of the struggle from that the National Party really sort of played with the dramatics of it and really said, oh my goodness, we'll never get you in a situation like this ever, da, 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 da. So they really sort of played on this idea of, we'll be your saviors from this terrible thing and we'll never have to rely on, we'll be the great nation. Once again, we'll never have to rely on people over water and stuff like that. So I think, again, coming back to, it's really important in terms of when you're looking at these things, thinking about the context, because I think without knowing the context, and you can suggest something different, but I think Dada as a movement can come across quite pretentious because it's people making stuff up. It's people like ripping up paper and throwing it on the floor. And that's art. It's the ready-made. And people really sort of jar with it when they don't understand what they were rebelling against. Yeah. And I think now that there's an understanding of that, I look at these works completely differently and I'm like, oh my God, this is so clever and actually like really revolutionary for what they had to hand, what they were fighting against. And as you say, it must have been so terrifying, like, or just like more good on them, like to stand their ground in the face of all these things and they'll make work like this.
Yeah, like you said, with little to no money, and also kind of, I think as well, it must have been quite strange. It must have been an uncertain future for art in general.
Yes.
For them, they must have been like, I guess it wouldn't have been seen as a way to make money or to live or to, how are you an artist if you can't afford paints, It must have been quite, not frightening. Yeah, it must have been quite frightening, actually. Yeah, it must have been quite worrying.
Yeah, and also, being told as a woman that actually, I know we said you could vote and you could do all that, but that's a lie. We're not going to let you do that now. And we're just going to get you back in the kitchen because that's essentially what happened. And everyone, you play your part for the greater good of the country. But I think this is Berlin at the time is such even now as a city, it really sort of thrives on a rebellious take on things and nature. So I think it's so important that, and it just completely makes sense that she was based in Berlin, and that sort of ethos really much, I think anyway, runs through the heart of the city, this sort of idea of like rebellion and, I don't know.
In her blood, isn't it? It's like, she's rebelling against, her own artist movement, against like the sensibilities of the time, against the politics of the time. You know, the fact that she doesn't have, you know, I'm going to be creative despite all of this troubles and how difficult it can be. I'm still going to do it. I think she's incredibly strong, yeah, and incredibly powerful in her artwork for doing that and for carrying on.
Yeah, no, I think she's just incredible. So what I'm interested in with this work in particular is, do you have any idea what's going on with like the background of it? Because it looks like there's some sort of feather boa situation being thrown up in the air. Can't really work out if they're on a bridge at the bottom. I just don't know.
I can definitely, I think that is meant to be like, you know, some sort of bridge or a stage, you know, something risen up, like, so they're above, you know, the floor ground. And again, yeah, like you said, that the feather boa in the sky. When I first saw it, I assumed those were clouds. But when you do look, I think it is meant to be a feather boa, you know, part of like a hat or
Yeah,
some
maybe. Because
very embellished headpiece.
Because I'm looking at this now and I'm like, because there's a bit of like netting at one side. So initially I was like, is this a net? Is it some sort of like commentary? But now that I'm looking at it, I do think it's a feather boa. And again, if anyone's listening and they're like, that is absolutely not what this is, let us know. It'll be really good fun. And we'll put, you know, I'll correct it online. But again, I think it's really good fun that we both can take different things from it. I love that you thought it was a cloud, because then again, there's also a whole conversation there. You'd be like, oh, the clouding over women's rights, and did it, like, you could go on and on and on. And again, I think this just shows how good she was as an artist, that she can spark these conversations and debates.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's exactly what she's doing. And I think as well with this one, there's the idea that you can be, you know, a model in a fashion show if you're a god like Venus. There's other people there who are obviously bits taken from actual models at the time. There's almost like a strange like baby face, someone quite young. There's an eye that looks like it's from sort of some Asian statue, I think it was, you know, from something from a museum again, and all these different things. It doesn't matter, you know, where you're from, your age, you know, just doesn't that. None of that comes into it. It's like they're all, you know,
they're diverse and they're beautiful, and they all deserve to be there. I love that. And again, that just completely fits in with her idea of like championing things that even now are only really coming to discussion boards, like the idea of like gender fluidity and diversity, inclusion, things that should have always been really, really important, but largely in movements have been overlooked for the idealized form and figure and how you should and shouldn't look. So I love that. I absolutely love that, Sam. That's like stole the show for me.
I think she's brilliant. And I think as well, having them, they aren't perfect as well. They're these unusual faces, you know, they're not, you know, every other artist, whenever they depict a woman, it's always, they're lounging naked on a sofa, or they, you know, this isn't that. It's totally different. They're beautiful, even though they're unusual looking. They, you know, they're not, their eyes are in the wrong places. They're just, it's brilliant.
Oh, I love that. And so this is, as we've said, she's left the Dada movement. This is the last work that we've selected as like the three to sort of springboard off of. So what was next for Hannah from this point? Do you know anything about what happened when World War II happened? Because I know that she lived till she was like 88, which is incredible.
Yeah, and I think I'm pretty sure she didn't leave Germany as well. While a lot of people fled, she stuck around. I'm pretty sure she did, or at least
she stuck around. Yeah,
did leave straight. Yeah, and then she almost went into hiding because she couldn't produce this artwork publicly or show it off publicly in exhibition. She just wasn't allowed. She would probably would have been in a lot of trouble if she did.
Well, that's it. And as you said, you called it a degenerate art. So again, when the Nazis were in full swing, and particularly during World War II, they were literally walking into museums and galleries, taking things off the wall and burning them on site if they considered it degenerate.
Yeah, and then I think she got married near the end of the end of the Second World War to a chap, but then I think she was divorced by 1944. So it was like she almost did go into this, oh, I guess I'm not going to be this woman artist while this is going on.
Ah, interesting.
I don't know. Yeah, but I think after that, she lived right up until 1978, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
And she was, a famous, like, celebrated artist afterwards. Yeah, I just love her. She's absolutely miles ahead of her time.
Oh my
That's one of
gosh,
the
yeah.
reasons she's in my top 5. She's brilliant.
She is just incredible. And there's so much, like, there's not so much, but there's a good amount of like resources online around her. There's lots of like really interesting videos, very much always tied into Dadaism and her as like a standalone. But when I Googled even podcast episodes on her, there was only maybe 2 or 3, which, considering how many episodes in the world they are about, I don't know, football or any other subject in the world, I thought 3 or 4
Yeah.
is not justification enough. So this is a very well-timed episode, and happy to be contributing to flying the banner for Hannah Höch and how brilliant she is. Is there anything else you want to say about her before we sort of like round off, or anything you think people should like check out if they're interested in her, if there's any good resources online, if people want to know more about her, or any books you have that you've loved?
Not particularly. There are some amazing books about her. Something I wanted to mention as well is that actually this method of collage that she did was quite prevalent later on in the 70s during the punk movement and things like that. So she almost like influenced things like punk in the fact that she was doing these collages that,
I
people
can
would all
so
like
see that now
emulate
that you've
later
said
on.
that.
Yeah.
Now that you said that, what's that really famous? I've got Pink Floyd in my head, a very famous sort of collaged.
There's the Sex Pistols, never
Sex
mind.
Pistols must be that.
Yeah. And, she did it way before any of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Oh, I just love that. Sam, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Hannah with me. And also thank you for like just, yeah, giving me the time to like learn about her and speak about it with you. I've had such a lovely conversation with you. Before you go, where
Mm-hmm.
can people find you, like see what you're up to? Because you're also an artist as well. So can you want to tell us a little bit about your practice and where people can connect with you?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I like to try my hand at a lot of different things. So I'm exploring automata at the minute, and mask making and
Ooh.
puppetry and things. But I also like to try my hand at collage and a lot of illustration work as well, a lot of sketchbook work. And you can check it all out at, I don't have a website or anything, but if you look for Sam Bradbury Art, all one word, on Instagram and Facebook and everywhere else. And yeah, have a little look if you want to.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And links to your Instagram and things will be in the show notes below. So please send me that.
Yeah, no problem.
Or I'll find it and put it in. Now, you have listened to the podcast before, so I don't know if you know what's coming, but I end the podcast on asking all my guests, or trying to remember to ask all my guests, the same question. And it's a bit of a big one. So you can take it as wide-reaching as you want, or as personal to you as possible, however you want to come at the question. But my question is, why is art important?
That is tricky. Okay. That's a very hard question. I would say art is important because it can't be tied down like other subjects. It's almost sort of something you can't grasp. It's like ethereal, and because of that, it's special in that it's not one thing. It's everything. It's nothing at all. And anyone can do it. That's one of my kind of big things, is that you don't have to be incredible at art or even very good at all. I think what makes you an artist is the fact that you do art, and you're only as good as the last piece of art you did. Yeah. And the only way you're going to get better is by making more and more terrible art until you get good. It's I don't know.
Oh, I love
I hope
that.
That makes sense.
No, absolutely. And that I love that you brought in that it's for everybody. Anyone can do it. It doesn't have to be this one thing. I think in all the episodes that I've done, no one's ever answered it like that. It doesn't, going back to what we said, like right at the beginning of the podcast episode, you don't have to pigeonhole it. It
No,
can be,
not at all.
it can be so personal to you. And I just love that. So Sam, thank you so, so much. It's been
That's
so
all right.
wonderful
Thank
to
you.
chat to you.
Yeah, it's been brilliant.
Bye. And there you have it, another episode of Jo's Art History podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, please make sure that you are following along on whatever platform you are listening to, or if you're watching us on YouTube, to like, rate and subscribe to the channel. Both of these things help the podcast grow week on week. If you would like to support the podcast in some way, please consider sharing this episode with a friend or relative that you think would also enjoy listening to it, or posting it on social media. This really does help build the listener database, and it's very much appreciated from my side of things. If you're also feeling a little bit generous and you would like to support the future of the podcast and future episodes, please consider purchasing a book from my Amazon wishlist, which is in the show notes below. And everything that you purchase comes straight to me and goes towards research for a future episode, or even equipment to make the podcast sound better and better season on season. If you would like to get in touch, please feel free to do so. You can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can connect and find me on Instagram, which is @joesarthistory. Please do feel free to send me a little message. It's always lovely to hear from people. And if you've enjoyed an episode that you've listened to with a guest on it, please also feel free to send guests on the podcast a message as well. It means so much to them that you've engaged with their topic of interest. And a small message really does go a long way. Finally, I've been Jo McLaughlin, your host and resident art historian here on Jo's Art History podcast, and thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep learning, and remember, art is for all. Bye.